You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavier joining you right now. Scott Caulfield will join us later. We'll talk some IU football first, and then IU basketball second. We got Taylor Lehman from Bison back joining us. Taylor and I were just reminiscing about how it's been too long since we were on together and talked football. So, Taylor, great to have you back. It's an opportune week to do this, as the IU spring game is happening either tomorrow, if you're listening on Wednesday night when we're recording this, or today. Hopefully not yesterday. Hopefully you caught us before then. But, Taylor, great to see you again. How you doing?
I'm good, Galen. I'm a little heartbroken today, actually. I don't know if you saw that they erased the Mad Ants now. It's not the Noblesville Boom. That tears at my 260 heart so much.
Yeah, that's like Fort Wayne erasure, right? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
You still got the tin caps, I guess.
Sure.
And the Dons, but it's that's a tough one. I had not seen that news, so my apologies on behalf of the ownership group.
Yeah, no, I've been joking with some folks about that from back home.
Yeah, it's.
I also realized we're both wearing some Oval content.
Yeah, you know, I think we did not talk about this beforehand, but hey, some days you just got to wear Oval, I think, is the answer to that.
Sometimes it's the vibe, yeah.
It is. So before we get started, just a reminder, folks, we're brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. Excited today by the Home Field News that they're launching a new baseball collection. I don't know if you saw this, Taylor, but really sweet-looking IU cap and hoodie, or not a hoodie, a pullover, is a pullover, part of the 2025 Diamond Classics collection, which will be dropping Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And they hit these out of the park. Great script Indiana pullover. They got the nice, almost football-esque, I would say, baseball cap going, and just delightful colors and whatnot. So 20 different colleges, Indiana one of those, and that will be dropping, as we mentioned, Thursday at 10 a.m. So be sure to head over to Home Field Apparel. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order, and get yourself one of those. Maybe pick up a T-shirt, or we're almost out of hoodie season at this point. Not entirely in Indiana, but almost out of it. But now's the time to get a little three-quarter tee action going, get a short sleeve, get a cap. You're going to need it while you're out there in the summertime. So head over to homefieldapparel.com. Follow them on socials as well. They're a great follow there. All right, before we get to the main part of the pod, just a quick reminder, we are also on YouTube. You can watch the podcasts. More and more people are doing this. We did a live emergency podcast last night with Assembly Call. Actually, it was with X's and Joe's. It was weird. You had the Crimson Cast host and the X's and Joe's guys. It was like we were doing it from Assembly Call's living room without them knowing we were there. So it was fun, though. And we had a bunch of people join us live on video, and we've had over 4,200 people watch that episode in less than 24 hours on video as we covered Lamar Wilkerson's commitment to IU. And we do that all the time on YouTube. So be sure to head over there, subscribe. You get notifications whenever we start a podcast or get one scheduled. And we use it regularly. We've also got Spotify. We've also got Apple. But consider subscribing to us on YouTube, and also subscribe to the Crimson Cast Substack. Subscribe to the Bite-Sized Bison Substack. Ours is free. Taylor's, you should just go ahead and subscribe to, because it's a little bit of money for a huge amount of information. If you want to be informed about IU football, as I know all of you do, that's the place to go get the info. So with all that, Taylor, you had a post the other day previewing the spring game, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the spring game and just everything that's going on this week. It's quite an interesting time for IU in terms of where they're at. It's been a pretty quiet spring. Only one major injury, which was an unfortunate one, obviously, as Indiana ends up losing, what looked like one of their premier imports in the portal, and needs to do something to fix that, as Tyler Morris out with a knee injury for the entire year. But the rest of it's been pretty on the down low. And other than Kurt Signetti getting real mad one day about a lack of effort, There hasn't been a whole lot of other noteworthy news, which I would argue coming off of a season like Indiana had is a good thing. You kind of just want to let this thing simmer on the stove for a little while unmolested.
Yeah, that Chris Ignetti press conference made me feel like I was back on my high school football team. I was like, okay, I like this. I like this coming from the coach, because I mean, you hear all the time like great things from all these press conferences, which is understandable. Everybody thinks their team is the best team in the country right now, and hearing that honesty from him is not surprising, but also a bit refreshing in some regards. But also, what he was talking about and kind of related to what you were saying is there's a lot of time between now and the opening week one. So there's still a lot to learn about this team behind closed doors, and player movement is not over. That's gonna that's kind of speeding up now again with the spring portal. But the spring seemed to be pretty uneventful, which is honestly, like you said, a good thing. Like you don't most of the news coming out of a spring camp is probably bad news. So if you can have as little news as possible, it's good.
If you're not having to publicly announce that you're moving on from your starting quarterback over an NIL dispute, you've probably done fairly well for yourself in the spring circumstances. You mentioned the portal, and this is I feel so bad for fans who aren't like sickos like you and me who have to keep up with all this news, because it's got to be confusing. It's like, wait, we just had the portal. Why do we have another portal? Well, part of the issue with this whole situation is the NCAA tries poorly to balance. These are just students. Therefore, they need to be allowed to move with the realities that these are really employees that are earning money for this in many cases. You have to have a second portal window, and coaches, I don't think, hate it in terms of like it allows them to plug holes that they maybe weren't able to fill the first time. You get a whole spring of evaluating who really should be on the team and who shouldn't. And it's a short portal window, but there's going to be I saw some figure the other day. They're estimating like $50 million minimum in NIL money is probably going to exchange hands over this 1 week of portal window that's coming up. It's nuts, but this is an opportunity for Indiana, who's more appealing now as a destination, certainly, than they were last year. And now Curt Cignetti and his staff have had a full 6-8 weeks to really dig in and evaluate what they've got on this roster.
Yeah, the people that you hear complaining about the portal the most are coaches, but they use the portal to their gain as well. This it is concerning with the spring portal being after spring camp, and you see a lot of programs doing away with their scrimmages, their spring game scrimmages, so that they're not showing other folks their talent. It would potentially open themselves up to poaching. I'm not sure exactly how much of that goes on, but I will say
I'd also say I hate the idea that it's called poaching, because it's like it's just player movement. Like this happens. But anyway, go on, please.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. But when I look at what happened after the spring game last year and some of the departures, obviously there was still a lot more work to be doing with this roster at this point last year for Indiana. But the major loss that they really had last year was Kobe Minor. He was the one that left after the spring game, and at that point they hadn't gotten D'Angelo Pons yet. So There was a minute there where we were like, who was the cornerback one? And so there's a lot of movement to be. I mean, when you look at the guys who arrived, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. I'm not like pointing to Curt Cignetti or anything like that, but this is how it can benefit a program and coaches involved as well. The guys that arrived were D'Angelo Pons, CJ West, Andrew DePape, then Solomon Van Horst, Tyreek Tucker, and then a couple depth guys in Najee Logan and Sedarius Doss. Those were big additions for that 2024 team, especially CJ West and D'Angelo Pons, of course. But so the player movement, it benefits both sides, right. And then like we see with the Tennessee quarterback Nico, I don't know. Obviously, it was about money, but I think it could also be about the Tennessee offense. People are saying it has to be one or the other. I think it could be both.
It could be both, yeah. Well, and again, it's like, was that an upgrade for UCLA at quarterback from what they had? Probably. Is it better for Tennessee that he's not there anymore? Sure. These are evolving processes is how I would look at it. And I think especially for a school like Indiana, where there's reasonable amounts of questioning, like how sustainable was what happened last year as you move forward. You have to trust the evaluative processes of the coaches because they clearly did an amazing job of both sets of portal additions that they did last year. But you mentioned this in the bite-sized Bison preview of the spring game. It's interesting because we're starting to see some names pop into the portal that were supposedly really highly regarded by the previous coaching staff, stuck around for that first year, and now they're no longer here. So I think you can take some things from that. And given that you still have a roster that's kind of part Tom Allen, part Curt Cignetti, James Madison, part Curt Cignetti, Indiana, that's a lot of different things. And it's better that there be processes by which you can move players out that no longer belong or didn't measure up to expectations or didn't develop and bring in new guys rather than just, we got to keep those guys on the roster for the next year or 2 years or 3 years or until they decide to transfer. This allows for a little more of a mutual settling of where the roster is and who's on it and what positions you need to focus on.
It's interesting too, Galen, because when you look at this, there's a note that I first saw Zach Osterman make, which was that there are three high school guys left from the 2023 class. There were only 17 in the first, kind of a small class in the first place, but 3 left is a little jarring. But then when you look at the scholarship chart, which I maintain a scholarship chart is in the latest BSB is linked there. There are 6 sophomores. And so they are, and those 6 sophomores are, they're some of the guys that they recruited directly in when they came in 2024. That's like Daniel Ndukwe, Mario Landino, Elijah Hardy. Those guys were all guys that they brought in, and then of course the 3 one's Nico Radicic. So so there's these guys are guys that they clearly felt fit their standard and their system. And then they're going to build up behind them. So this is going to be, it might be a reality every season. It's hard to project where college football is going, but it seems like it's clear that, they're going to work their way through the transfer portal like this, build each team as it goes, try to find as much longevity as they can with these guys, and then kind of work their way up through the high school ranks. I think this 2026 class is going to be a huge part of that process as well. But yeah, like you were saying, Galen, there are some guys that they're pushing out that they were getting some praise from the previous regime, and I think they're trimming some fat from the roster to build up muscle in other places. That's the way I put it in BSB.
Yeah, I'm glad that they waited on some of them because I think you do have to give players a chance to develop and grow. But if it's not going to work, or if it's a mismatch in one way or another, I think we've seen it's best to move on and figure out something else. And there's plenty of players out there, as we've seen. You gotta hit on the right guys. And that's always the big question mark. And that's what makes the spring game fun, albeit inconclusive in terms of what you're actually going to see. So I think I don't know, there weren't that many people at the spring game last year. I'm hoping there's going to be more people at the spring game this year. I don't know if there will be. It's on a Thursday night. They moved it from the original date on Saturday. It's not going to be televised, but I would hope there'd be more people out, particularly students, because you could tell student enthusiasm for football this time last year was at an all-time low. It's significantly higher than that. There's been some promotions to try to get some students out there, which I like to see. What is it that you covered spring games at IU, you've covered spring games at Ohio State. What should people be looking for when they go to watch this half of football that's going to be scored oddly and, is going to really be less of a game and more of a showcase of where players are at a moment in time?
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to get a foothold if they don't know a lot about football strategy, So the way that I always approach when I'm looking at offenses, like we watched the whole season of Indiana's offense, so you'll be able to pick up on some differences because there is carryover from the previous season, the previous system. But the way that I always look at it, I targeted the tight ends last year. I wanted to see how they use tight ends because I didn't think they used them very well in previous seasons, and so that was a a big clue into how this offense is going to be ran in 2024. I think the same thing is going to happen in 2025 because the tight end position is really interesting right now with this Indiana offense. So watch the tight ends because obviously specifically for this season, but also tight ends can show you a lot about how an offense is ran. I think last year it was difficult because the running backs looked like world beaters last year, but there were like hardly any interior defensive linemen in that game. So it was difficult to know, so when you're looking at like a system, when you're considering like offensive linemen and running backs working together within the running game, that might not always get you the best clue into how that unit is going to perform or how that phase of the offense will perform, because we don't know, what's experimentation and what's not. And so, I look at the tight ends on offense, and I'm going to be looking at obviously defensive line rotations and then safeties on defense and seeing, how they kind of maneuver defensively. I don't think there are going to be too many changes, but the biggest change I think is probably going to be along the defensive line. Who plays defensive end? How does Mikhail Kamara look at stud if he plays much at all? And then how do they rotate on interior defensive line? But honestly, the spring game is great for just seeing the guys on the field together, seeing Fernando Mendoza throw some passes, seeing what the receivers look like compared to last year. But I think one of the big things that I'm also looking for is just an opportunity to see the young guys play because you're not going to see them on the field in 2025. So if there are particular young guys that you like, that you want to watch, you take this opportunity to do so because they're probably not going to be playing much in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, it's key.
That was kind of a lot. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Look, I think for a lot of people, again, as we've talked about many times, there are people in the IU football fan base who understand what a true college football culture is like. There's many other, the majority of people in the IU fan base, this is the first off season I think they've gone into really psyched up about football and wanting to know. And so I appreciate you breaking it down as far as maybe some things to keep an eye on. I think it's also worth noting, and you did a great job of bringing this up in the recent Bite-Sized Bison newsletter. Don't take too much from performances, particularly at the skill positions. You mentioned the running backs look like gangbusters last year, and they ended up being very good, but in a different way than we saw in the spring game. And everybody was excited about Taven Jackson, and everybody was a little skeptical about Curtis Rourke. And wow, that we saw how that went. You had one guy who, without the injury, might have been a mid-round draft pick, and you had another guy who isn't here anymore. So there's just some. You don't want to read too much into anything with this. As you said, it's great to see guys on the field, but the statistical performances are probably not going to be anything that you would want to bet on going into August and September. No,
I remember Lincoln Murph, a walk-on cornerback, had a pretty solid game. He was on for some important reps. I think he ran with the twos at one point. And then we didn't see him at all in the regular season. I remember Alex Rodriguez, the running back. I can't remember what season it was, but he had a great spring game, several years ago, and just nothing from him. It's just the way the spring games go. But yeah, I do remember being I knew that it was going to take a minute for Curtis Rourke and the wide receivers to kind of gel and for that offense to work because everybody was just getting into town. Yep. Maybe we'll see something a little bit more advanced now, but in the end, this could be an even better passing attack than last season, and it could look worse than it did last year in the spring game. It's just really hard to tell. I remember also on top of that, another example is Drew Alar at Penn State. Mm-hmm. He had some terrible looking throws during their spring game last year, and people thought Penn State was going to be not very good because he couldn't throw the ball. But then we saw how far Penn State went. He wasn't exactly fantastic, but he wasn't bad. He was right. He was good. Yeah. So just some things to keep in mind for everybody, because ultimately it's odd because it's a lot of hype in terms of it's the spring game, and then it's a half of football, and it's at 8:00 at night, and then it's over, and then you're done with football for a while, except for the portal editions, which obviously we'll be tracking. Can I add one thing, Galen? it's really hyped also because it's a big recruiting event. So they want it to feel hype. They want people to be there. I remember last year you were saying this. I remember last year was mostly just like family of the players. I remember sitting in the stands and I'm like, it's mostly just like family and friends. But yeah, it's definitely important to kind of take a lot of these things with a grain of salt and just kind of enjoy what you're looking at. There's not a whole lot of analysis you can really do.
Yeah, but it is some of the positions you talked about, probably not things that you're going to focus on initially as a spectator. I mean, who goes to a game to watch the defensive line specifically in the rotations? Taylor Lehman is that person, by the way, folks.
Mentally ill folks like me.
But these are, I always liken it to, it's like a prototype of a car. You're probably going to make some engineering changes to the car, but you got to make one first and see what works, what doesn't, what's in conflict with something else. And this is a nice way to do that as a fan. And again, you may not have a carryover personnel wise down the line, especially since there's probably going to be some transfer portal additions that could change things. You mentioned tight end being a good example. There's been a lot of buzz about tight ends in the portal. You got the Cal tight end in the portal. You got Wisconsin just lost a tight end to the portal. So you've already got some pieces that are floating around that Indiana's certainly going to be evaluating. This is perhaps an opportunity for them to get those people in the building, see how things are done, and be able to make a sale, so to speak, on what they could do here at Indiana. And then obviously high school recruiting still very important. And you're still building from the ground up with that. Like you're still forming those connections. If you're Curt Cignetti and his staff, you've only been in the job now for 16 months, 17 months, whatever it is. There's a lot of layering that has to go in with that. And it's why it was what the frustrating thing about Tom Allen not wanting the spring game, because it's like that was the regime that couldn't afford to not have a big recruiting event to bring people in. And yet they went away from it for reasons that we've speculated on the podcast before. So it's a welcome change. And it's nice to see Curt Cignetti recognizing that and not taking the Matt Rule approach. It's not like, well, I can't be held accountable if they steal my players. It's like, well, no, we're just going to go do what we need to do and get what we need out of it. And then maybe we can add some additional people to the mix.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like that, the spring games almost seem like a party when you're not like, I remember when I was covering Ohio State and covering their spring game, it felt almost more like a party than a scrimmage, and it was because they want those vibes for the recruits. And now you can have transfers.
Yeah.
Like they'll probably have transfers visiting for the spring game, so it's not just high school recruits, it's also transfers who could potentially come in the spring. So yeah, I think there is multifaceted. It's not just what you see on the field and what the fans see. There's also a lot of things happening behind closed doors as well. So there are a lot of things going on that the coaches are thinking about and maneuvering. So it's an exciting time, but we don't get to see all of it.
Right. And the transfer portal thing is going to be interesting because having it on a Thursday, one of the benefits is you're not going up against a bunch of other people's spring games on Sunday or Saturday or Sunday. So you could kind of squeeze one in, perhaps get people here who might not otherwise have been able to come because they might be being courted by other schools and they'd rather check those out. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. 8:00 kick at Memorial Stadium. I think doors open at 7. I'm going to be over there. I got a press credential for this one, so I'll be up in the box watching from that seat. And I think, are you going to be up there too, or are you down in the stands?
I'm going to be down in the stands. I actually prefer to be in the stands because I can see the players a lot closer. So that was really fun last year. I don't know if I'll have the same opportunity this year because there might be more people there. But I was like right up there and watching them. It was a good time. It was really enlightening too. Yeah, if you can get as close to the field as possible, I definitely recommend it.
Well, come see Taylor or me or both of us at the spring game tomorrow at Memorial Stadium. We'd love to just say hi. I'll see what I can do. I'll try to get down to the stands a little bit because I always enjoy watching from the stands as well for many of the reasons you just mentioned. But Taylor, thank you for joining us on the show. Again, Bite Size Bison is the newsletter. Go subscribe right now. If you would like to be informed about IU football, it's pretty much the best place to get that. And we'll look forward to having you on again soon because we got to talk some basketball at some point as well.
Yeah. No, I was really excited about the Lamar Wilkerson edition too. I would stay on and talk with you and Scott, but I got to go.
The man's got places to be. Taylor Lehman, Bite Size Bison. Buddy, thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you soon.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Taylor hopping off, and guess who's joining us? It's Scott. Hi, Scott.
Hey, how you doing, man?
We're doing fine. You know, I scheduled myself very poorly because I have another podcast that I produce and I'm a guest on, and I did 3 episodes of that before this podcast. So even
dude, I don't talk to my wife about my other wives, so you can just leave this. You know, you shouldn't be talking to me about this.
I like how that's where you went, and not, wow, Galen's been podcasting for 2 hours straight after doing an hour-long live podcast yesterday. You know, you were just like, I don't want to be jealous.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Enjoy the practice tomorrow. It reminds me of Zoolander with is this a school for ants? Because the press box is so far up. You're going to be looking down and like, who is that Mendoza? Like, oh no, it's a wide receiver. It is. If you've not been up in the Memorial Stadium press box, it's up there, man. It's not a great view.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but you know, it's one of those where I think it's good to have multiple perspectives, you know, watching the game, and it's the closest you get to coach's film without actually watching coach's film is how I look at it. So
totally true. And I will just say for the spring game, I heard you listen to the end of that. It's so awesome to be excited about a spring game at IU football. I mean, this is one of the few times I can remember having this, and we haven't had a spring game for years, but just the excitement that I feel talking to people. It's like, wow, I actually kind of want to watch the spring game. I can't remember a time I've been like that.
See, we're just gradually changing hearts and minds here.
Yeah.
I think that's important. So
yeah.
I'm glad we've gotten you on the bandwagon. It's great. So
yeah, I'm there.
But we're going to chat some basketball. Obviously, big news yesterday, which we covered on the emergency pod with Mike Weemuth and Bob Moats. Lamar Wilkerson from Sam Houston State has announced he's coming to IU, 6'5" shooting guard, one of the best shooters in the portal. And really, I think kind of put some people's minds at ease, including yours. You had texted me earlier in the day complaining and joking about how a lack of players on the roster. Only, 4 hours later to have the announcement coming that Wilkerson would be here. I gave you credit for essentially
willing it into existence,
Jedi mind tricking the recruiting process into reality. But we haven't had a chance to hear your thoughts on this yet. So please take the floor.
Yeah, no, my text was like, a lot of caveats. Like, I'm not freaking out. I'm scared, but like, it would be nice to get some players on the roster. I was thinking more about it, and I listened to the emergency pod. You know, I think I'll speak for those. And again, I was not freaking out, but for those who have been concerned, I think it does come from a place where we've had 8 years and then a hyper amount of 4 years where, you know, up to this point, we've had no real information about recruiting coming out with this groups thus far. And we have 4 players on the roster as of yesterday. I think we have 5 now. But, you know, there's a long history of 8 years of not a lot of recruiting success, and then 4 years of a lot of stories about, hey, this guy's not recruiting, or this coach doesn't know the name, or this coach is on vacation during recruiting time. And so to then suddenly just be told, hey, have faith in the process, it's going to be fine, and then have no news, 8 years tells me, like, I'm a little bit concerned when I don't hear anything, because the previous regimes have been nothing's happening, and nothing happening's meant nothing was really happening. In this case, it's really nice to know that nothing is happening, but actually a lot of things are happening. Like, work is being done. When I'm going to sleep, I know that my IU basketball coach is still working and getting on planes to go visit recruits and doing the things that a functional basketball coach should be doing. So all I say is I think people had the right to be a little concerned as days kept on ticking and nothing was happening. To understand it's a new regime. We know that, but it's like 8 years of, stories like that. I think we're people have been in that spot.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a bit on the podcast yesterday, and one of the things that, if you've been following closely the goings on around the program, most of the leaks, pretty much all of the leaks, are gone. Right. And that it was a purposeful choice, it appears, by the athletic department to reset the relationship between the basketball program and the media, the basketball program and the fan base. Because this was, I believe this when I said it yesterday, I believe it today. I think those things really hurt the perception of IU basketball. The fact that you'd hear about recruits 4 or 5 days before they got here, and you'd hear about this guy didn't do this or this guy didn't do that, or you'd hear about, well, we could have offered Aaron Henry, but we got Demezy Anderson instead because he was. I mean, it's stuff like that where it's. I think a lot of the information that IU fans, online IU fans, have gotten used to was not information that should have been provided, but was information that was being leaked. And so it is refreshing, to me at least, that IU seems to have cinched that up. Now, I certainly can understand the perspective that some folks have in the fan base about, well, gosh, if we're not hearing anything, nothing must be happening. Why aren't they doing X, Y, and Z? And I do think that the Wilkerson commitment gives a lot of cover for the idea that people were starting to form, which was that, well, we're not going to have a roster, or we're going to striking out left and right. You know, I've tried to explain this on the podcast. We've talked about it a little bit the last show that we did. These things are neither linear nor do they happen all at once. And most of the pressure early on to sign deals was based upon the House settlement and whether that was going to go into effect. It hasn't. It's not going to in the next couple of weeks either. So that extended everybody's timeline. But it's also one of those where you do, I think, have to have some evidence in terms of players signing and like this is going to be the roster before people really start to get comfortable with things. So I understand the skepticism, but I do think, again, like my recommendation to fans, if they're feeling as you were feeling, is you can't carry the same level of skepticism and cynicism into the new regime that dominated the old. And I know that's easier said than done, but you really do have to almost like be like, well, we're starting fresh. And I have to assume that the coaches know what they're doing until I see incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. And certainly I don't think we're anywhere close to that.
No, I agree. And I personally wasn't feeling that way. I was kind of speaking for those people and kind of joking about it. But I will say that this signing, it does put my mind at ease. Like, all right, if we don't hear anything for another week, I now know that we have a real grinder there. And we've seen it by, you know, you mentioned this, the Field of 68 interview. The thing that stood out to me was the quote of, you know, oh, DeVries flew back out to see me again to kind of basically close the commitment, which is like, wow, I don't think, and I guess that was my point. It's like, I don't feel like that's been done in 8 years.
Well, well, hold on. I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I will say clearly that him saying that was, as I think I described it, was catnip to IU fans yesterday. I don't think that you can assume that never happened. And I think part of the problem, and again, this goes back to the leaks thing, is there were clearly some mistakes made. There were clearly some poor judgment in terms of things that were done. I don't think we can assume that nothing was ever done because clearly Indiana was still bringing in talented players. They were still doing, you know, whether it was Archie Miller or whether it was Mike Woodson. It's more like either the system didn't work or the core philosophy behind which the program was designed around was just inadequate to the current environment of college basketball. So I guess that's the one thing I would say. It's like, I think it's easy, and I've been as guilty of it as anyone. It's easy to be like, well, now things are in great. It's kind of like that scene from Hoosiers, you know, where Jimmy Chitwood walks in to the church, you know, it says, you know, I think it's time for me to start playing basketball. And, you know, George is up there saying, I told you as soon as we got rid of him, pointing at Norman Dale. And then, of course, the next line happens. You're like, oh, there's always more than meets the eye on these things. But regardless of how broadly applicable the arguments were that Woodson wasn't recruiting with vigor or that Archie Miller was making the wrong decisions in certain things or you know, or whatnot, just showing Darren DeVries being able to have that happen and having the player come out and say that as being a major factor is such a nice change of pace. And it does feel like there's a little bit of healing happening already with IU fans if they've seen that aspect of this story.
The other thing that's been calming to me through this is, and part of it just has to be, you have to have faith in the new regime. And it's just, you know, you do. Like, if you're a fan, you can't immediately be like, all right, well, we haven't got recruits. Like, this guy sucks. Like, you have to have faith. And it doesn't always work out like Signetti, but you have to have faith that it will, you know, but it does feel like, you know, DeVries is putting together a team. And you mentioned, like, you know, shopping at Whole Foods on the last pod, I think was a really good analogy. You know, that feels like a very good way, and it feels like that's going to take some time, and like you're being very selective of who you're picking. Whereas, you know, the last 2 years under Woodson, it did feel like, hey, let's just, who's the biggest names, who's the biggest bag we can throw out, like let's go get that. You felt that way. I felt that way a lot under Crean, when it's like, hey, the top 20 recruits, we've offered all of them. And it's like, are they all good fits for our system? Like, this can't be the way that it works. And it does feel like DeVries is being very selective.
All the girls in my high school class out on a date.
Yeah, it's like that. Hey, you know, and that guy normally is kind of successful. That's not how you build a basketball team. Just, hey, there's everybody who said yes. Welcome, guys. What are we going to play today? So I do think that, you know, it does feel like he's being selective, and I do have faith that he's building the team that's going to be there. So I'm excited. I also, you know, I'm hitting on some of the things you guys talked about, but I do think the other piece that I absolutely love here is you got this guy from Kentucky. You know, and it's somebody that Kentucky was actively recruiting. It wasn't just a Kentucky threw out one of, 12. Like, it's like they took that kid to the Preakness. Kentucky fans are all pissed because it's like we were going for this. And I was talking to somebody today.
Not the Preakness. The Preakness is in Baltimore. If they flew him to Baltimore, no wonder he committed to Indiana.
Fair point. A horse race. But the thing that I was talking to some friends about today that kind of, it's like, oh yeah, and we're playing Kentucky this year. Like, this is great. Like, let's get it going. Like, this is a great little pull from Kentucky as well that I absolutely love. And it's like, now we're going to play them. We got some hatred. Like, let's go. I mean, we'll probably still lose in Rupp, but who knows?
Well, they just set the date for that. I didn't know if you saw it, but they originally scheduled the date for the Indiana game in Rupp for the 20th of December, which was going to be the first. They moved it. Now it's the 13th of December, which is great because after Indiana wins the Big Ten title in football up in Lucas Oil on December 6th, the same day they're playing Louisville at Gainbridge, then the next week they can go and beat Kentucky in Rupp prior to their first round game. Actually, no, they won't even have a first round game in the college playoff because they'll have a bye. So actually we'll have a 2-week break after that Kentucky game to get ready for that next college football playoff game.
So am I handing off the fever dream torch to you? Is this Galen's fever dream?
As one of my close friends would note, I'm big into manifesting at this point. We're just manifesting all of this happening, right in a row. So
that would all be all. Yes, I will take all of it.
There you go. Yes,
give that to me in a syringe. No, this, I will go back to this. It's kind of that idea of like, now I do know that the coaches are, and I always believe they were working, but it's like now you're starting to see some of the results, and it's going to take some time, and they're going to pick and choose. But I like the team that it looks like DeVries is building right now. You guys mentioned how this was, all the schools that this guy, all this other schools going for this guy was SEC schools. And it is interesting, you've kind of talked about around this in a couple other areas. And we see it with, how dominant the SEC has been and how unlike Big Ten teams, the SEC teams look. You still look around the Big Ten and like Purdue's going to be good, but they're going to be a traditional Purdue team. Michigan State is going to be good. They're going to be traditional. There's something cool about like, hey, let's go get all the SEC guys. Like, let's do what Auburn's doing and let's do it here. Cause it doesn't seem like a lot of other Big Ten teams are either trying or have the resources to replicate it. So, this is something you taught me years ago. It was in the Crean recruiting. We would get guys and you're always like, look who we're going up against. Cause that's more of a barometer than what their ranking is or what they, how many stars they were. It's like, oh, guy's a 4-star, but like he was being recruited by Belmont. But something doesn't jive here. This is a guy who was, Wilkerson was recruited by Kentucky, Auburn, and those are the three, and us. So Ole Miss, thank you, Ole Miss, but all SEC schools.
Well, and it's funny because the original process of evaluating the offers as the barometer of the player actually came from watching IU football for so many years. When you're seeing like IU. Yeah, they're not recruiting the same athletes that Michigan and Ohio State are recruiting, but they're also not recruiting the same athletes that Illinois and Michigan State are. They're recruiting against Akron or they're recruiting against Toledo or Western Michigan or Miami of Ohio, and you're just
And
like
losing, by the way.
and yeah, in many cases losing, and you're just kind of like, there's something not right here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, with basketball, I mean, look, we've talked a lot over the course of the history of this podcast about the fundamental issues that Big Ten teams have had because they have not been attracting the types of athletes that really make differences at the in NCAA tournament time in many cases, because you're having to recruit a different type of player to succeed in the Big Ten. And to some degree, you almost have to break that cycle of dependency and say, we are going to run a system that is focused around something other than power and brute force. And we have to focus it on something that's based more on athleticism and skill. Well, then you got to go out and try to get those players. Yeah, and we'll see if it works out. But as we saw with Michigan, Michigan was able to be a successful program in the Big Ten under John Beilein while running a diametrically opposite system from what most of the teams in the conference did, one that was predicated on offense and predicated on shooting. And, they didn't always win the Big Ten title, but they made 2 national championship games. So I do think that there is value in that. And I think we are probably due at some point for a paradigm shift in the conference. And you can't help but look at the SEC and say, they have some they are top loaded as a conference, but they have a lot of athletic skill throughout the course of that conference. That's what you really have to try to do. So yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. And I think, it is yet to be determined whether you can make a roster up almost entirely of players that are coming in from second and third tier conferences. So that's where I could see a little bit of trepidation or a little bit of concern if you were a fan and you're like, I'm not going to get too excited about this. I want to wait, because it's like, well, okay, it's a guy from Sam Houston State. It's a guy from Davidson, hypothetically a guy from Troy, a guy from Idaho, a guy from North Florida. Like, why aren't we pulling players in from power conference teams? Why aren't you going all after the guy from LSU or the guy from Maryland? And we talked about this a little bit on the emergency pod yesterday. Like, some of it is budget, where even if you've got a ton of money, you've got to be judicious with how you spend it, because you want to get good depth players. There's an interesting analysis that I will not read directly off of because it came from a subscription site, but the summation of a player, for instance, that just got projected to go to IU, this guy, the guy from North Florida who was visiting today, is now a projection to go to IU. We'll wait until it's official before we go in depth on him. But the idea is, like, this isn't an elite player, but it's a good player. And that's what Indiana needs. They need good players. You want to have 1 or 2 guys who you would classify as elite who can grow into that elite role. But where Indiana has often struggled is that they haven't had even players that would classify as good in spots 7, 8, 9, or even 6, 7, 8, 9, sometimes even into the starting lineup to some degree. And so it's a different method of roster construction. And I think it's got as good of a chance as any, but you're still kind of adding to nothing. Right. The nothing will start to build into something, and then we'll see what we've got. But it is an interesting thing to kind of watch the process of go through, because it is very different and hard to get your head wrapped around as an IU fan, because you're referencing essentially a blank roster page to start with, and you can't really see how all the pieces will fit together, nor have you seen the system that they're being plugged into being run at Indiana in any recent memory.
No, it's all sand. You're building question marks on question marks. The other thing that I've been thinking about, you've talked a lot about, resource allocation or the budget. But one other way that I was thinking about this, to look at this, is there is resource allocation based on the team. Let's just pick a number. Let's say IU has $10 million to spend on NIL this season. You can't give $10 million to one player and then have nothing for everybody else. You have to have kind of a salary cap like that. Again, nobody wants to talk it like it's not professional, but it is. The other piece that I will say, and I'm being kind of very overarching on this, so forgive me for not having a perfect analogy, but the Pacers have to do the same thing. The difference is they can agree to pay Halliburton $35 million a year because they know they're going to make $140 million from TV revenue every year the next 5 or 6 years. Like, there is a steady stream of money coming in. The other piece of this that is also kind of sand and a question mark is the money that IU has to spend year over year. It's not like it's based on an amount. It's a finite number that can change in that. And what I mean by this is the last 2 years, again, this is kind of a generalization, but the last 2 years, Indiana kind of went after big name, big target spends. We go get Khalil Ware. Don't make the tournament. You pay him, probably a hefty sum. You go get Omar Ballo. Don't make the tournament. At some point, you can't keep going to that same donor. Like, hey, I need another $5 million to go get a player. At some point, they're going to say, hey, you got to do something different. Or that donor's like, I'm done. You go to another donor. Like at some point, you run out of donors. Like the NBA isn't going to run out of money. Like they're going to continue to get TV contracts. They know for the next 10 years, they're going to fund. And so I do think a change of strat. So I do think there's also resource allocation where IU has to be understanding that you can't keep pissing or taking donors' money and having no results. And so the idea of instead of maybe going after one or two huge names, like huge splashes in the portal, let's build a lot of smaller players and maybe this will work better. That could also keep the war chest going, because I think that's another piece of the allocation of resources is that it's not just an unlimited supply of money that comes in. At some point, donors are going to say, I'm kind of tired of this. Like, I don't want to keep doing, big one-time spends for players.
So I both agree with your premise and disagree a little bit. I think you're right. I mean, I think just constantly taking swings at big players or trying to get the number one or number two player in the portal, I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with getting the number one or number two player in the portal, just like there's nothing inherently wrong with getting like a top 5 recruit or a top 10 recruit, right. Maybe Romeo Langford, for instance. But if you don't have a system in place that allows you to maximize the talents of that player in the context of the accomplishments of the team, then it's wasted money to some degree. And that's where I think donors get upset. I think it's why Mike Woodson's no longer the head coach here. Just same with Archie Miller, where it's like, Archie Miller in a 3-year span got Romeo Langford, who I forget what his ranking was, but he was, I think, a top 15, top 10 recruit. And he got Trace Jackson Davis, who, while not ranked quite as high, was a generational player with Indiana, made the tournament 0 times and got fired, not because he got those guys, but because he, A, didn't surround them with the right personnel, and B, didn't have a system that they worked in, especially offensively. Mike Woodson basically had a different version of the same problem, where he did a lot to maximize what Trace Jackson Davis could do on the floor. He got Khalil Ware. He got Omar Ballo. He got Miles Rice, who was a pretty hot commodity in the portal last year. It didn't matter. Right. Those signings were empty because, and I think your NBA analogy kind of works here in a different way than you intended. The number of NBA teams who have gone out and splashed the cash on a big free agent signing and then put nothing around them,
right,
and have gotten locked into horrific contracts. This is the Bradley Beal phenomenon, and we've seen it dozens of times in the NBA over the last 20 years. Mike Woodson, I think his philosophy was, I need a star in the post because that's where my offense is predicated around. That didn't work in college because that's not how the college game works.
Right.
At the NBA level, it's like, well, we need a star. And half the time the star is needed, not necessarily even just for their play, but we got to sell jerseys. We got to sell tickets. We got to get people in the arena. It's what makes the Luka Doncic trade such a bizarrity. But if you don't have a coherent philosophy,
bizarrity, I like that word. A bizarre oddity. Is that combining those two? I like that.
Minting vocabulary here on Crimson Cast. If you don't have a coherent vision and philosophy as an organization, it doesn't matter how much money you spend, your roster construction is going to suck. I mean, this was the problem with the Pacers, post 2008, for about 3 years until they were like, oh, I know what we're going to do. We're going to settle on this collection of players, and that's going to put us in contention to be, maybe going to the NBA Finals. And they were in contention. They just had very bad timing luck. But it doesn't mean the philosophy itself was wrong. Whereas there's plenty of teams I could point to, they didn't build intelligently, like the New York Knicks for many years.
Right.
And they paid the price over and over again and seemingly never learned their lesson. And that's where
Mike Woodson.
Well, but he wasn't picking the players.
I know. I'm just.
But that is an interesting tie. So I look at it from the perspective at the college level. It is interesting because the other complication is that in the pros, there are limits on what you can spend on players. There are limits on how much you can spend. You can go over those if you really want to get into the luxury tax. That doesn't really exist at the college game level. Your limitations are, what are your resources coming from your donors? What is your revenue share allocation going to be with your athletic department? And then from there, how good is your talent evaluation? How good is your system that you're plugging players into? And what is the end goal with everything? And this is where I think the roster construction for this IU roster for next year is going to be fascinating, because they're going after right now, like, Wilkerson's going to have 1 year left.
Right.
Yeah,
A lot of seniors they're going after.
Tucker DeVries is going to have 1 year left. If Luke Goody comes back, he'll have 1 year left. And look, that's a choice. Now, you could try to get some younger players in the portal, but I think the idea here is kind of twofold. And again, I could be wrong. This is just me trying to evaluate from a distance, since I'm clearly not in the meetings. I was not on the plane with Darren DeVries going to visit Lamar Wilkerson. But I look at it and I say, okay, Indiana clearly needs to have some initial success. And there's a couple of reasons for that. A, they need to win the fans back.
Right.
If you were in Assembly Hall the last couple of years, you recognized a real growing problem that has not really been publicly identified, which is that the connection between the program and especially the students, but I think a lot of younger fans under the age of 45, it's not there. It's just not there. And you can look at the empty seats in the balcony. You can look at the rampant booing in the Illinois game. You can look at the kind of unsettled nature of some of the home games down the stretch, even games that Indiana won. And you can say to yourself, there has to be some success, something for people to latch onto. And you're going to have a better shot at that if you've got a more veteran team, especially a team of hungry guys who are coming together in a system that's going to put them in a position where they can be maximally successful. So that's, I think, part of it. But I also think because of the portal, you have to make yourself an attractive landing spot. The fact that DeVries, with no tape of him at Indiana, and 1 year at West Virginia that did not result in a tournament bid, was able to come in and convince the second best shooter, hypothetically, in the portal from three to come to Indiana, as opposed to going to Kentucky, who was a top 15 team for part of the year, or going to Auburn, who was in the Final Four. Instead, they're coming to Indiana. Like, that to me says, all right, there's already a good sales pitch here. There's already a pitch that is appealing to players like that. But that's only going to last for so long. You're going to have to show results in this first year to convince the next wave of players that you're bringing in, whether that's recruits from high school or whether that's portal players, that Indiana is a place you want to go. Not just because of NIL, but because you can achieve your goals as a basketball player. Whether that is, I want to go to the pros, whether that's, I want to lead a team to the Final Four. That's why I think there's this bias towards older players. And it's also like, unless you've got a dynamite player who you're going to have for a couple of years, what's the point in bringing a developmental piece? Because you might develop them for somebody else.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, I also think part of the portal is just most of the guys, like Wilkerson played like JUCO, right? JUCO, and then Sam Houston. Like, a lot of guys in the portal have that story where they've gone up 1 or 2 levels, and you do that and you're going to be a junior or a senior. There's not a lot of sophomores in the portal that are of note. I guess Khalil Ware was. No, I agree with all of that. And I think this also, I think it's smart. I mean, obviously, early success isn't bad. Like, no coach is like, you know what? I doubt Arch's like, we're going to lose to Indiana State. Like, that'll show them. That'll show them who's boss. I think all coaches are trying to do that. But I do think, it's a smart approach. I agree with you. It also gives you time to kind of build your ground game in the recruiting and say, all right, now we can build that slight pipeline in there. I would also throw this out there. I was kind of thinking as you were talking about this, and forgive me if I'm just completely missing on somebody, but different eras with Archie and Woodson, because we're just in a different era now. I don't remember Woodson or Archie having a really killer recruiting offseason before their first season. Now, I know it's totally different. Like, neither of them had the portal, so it's a different scenario, but like we were talking about, Archie getting Romeo and then Trace. That was after he had success on the court, like you're talking about. Woodson did his work in the portal. The portal wasn't there his first year. I'm aware of that, but his work was done, with Khalil Ware and Ballo after he had tape to show like, hey, I'm a post guy. I'm going to do this in the post. It's just more to highlight your point. There's no tape of DeVries at Indiana, and he's still having this success. We haven't seen that. The other two coaches had it based on the tape that they had. Again, it's not a great comp because neither Woodson or Archie had this kind of portal opening, the first year they started, but just making note of that.
I don't know if I totally agree in as much as so you think about when Archie came in, there was a class that was brought in there, the 2017 class, which was Race Thompson, Justin Smith, Clifton Moore, and Al Durham. And there had to be some, I believe, that was, I always look at the first two classes as something worth indicating or, kind of reading into. And I think people forget the first full class that I would attribute as far as Archie Miller being at IU, that class, according to the recruiting rankings, had had 5 players in the top 150. It had Romeo Langford, Jerome Hunter, Demezy Anderson, Rob Finnessy, and Jake Forrester. And that was a group that people were pretty excited about. And
all I'm saying is that there was tape of Archie coaching at IU at that point when he signed Romeo.
Okay. I'll give you that. But yeah, you're right. The paradigm has changed quite a bit, and I think ultimately it's almost, but I think it's worth noting it's like a different sport to some degree from that perspective. How do we interpret the reality of the situation within the confines of we're, not only are we not focused as much on high school recruiting as the end all be all, the only place to be, but in some cases, especially like this, if we were truly looking at 2017 in 2025, you'd be starting with a brand new roster. This would almost be 2008, 2009.
Green's first year again of just a bunch of freshmen. Yeah.
So it's a really interesting thing. And look, you don't know how it's going to play out because it could not work. It could work really well. What I told people at the end of the podcast yesterday was, if you're skeptical, I get it. But maybe don't automatically leap to skepticism as the primary method by which you're going to interpret all of this. Maybe instead think about it from the perspective of, hey, I'm excited at the fact that Indiana's starting to pull in players. I can start to see, if I look at the roster, how all these pieces might fit together. If I go back and watch tape of what I know DeVries' offense and defense have done at his previous 2 stops, I can kind of get a sense of what it might look like in an Indiana uniform. Lean into those things. As much as we'd like to look at and react to and live within the emotional and mental confines of IU basketball over the last 8 to 9 seasons, the reality is, and this goes back to the leaks thing that we talked about when you jumped on the podcast, a bunch has changed in this offseason. And I mean, you're going to have a brand new strength and conditioning coach. You're going to have a brand new trainer. A guy who's been there for 45 years is no longer going to be there. You've got brand new assistants. You've got a brand new head coach. You're going to have all of these changes that have taken place. This is essentially IU basketball molting and reemerging with a new skin. And yes, you still got the red and white uniforms and you still got the candy stripes, but realistically speaking, it's a brand new program. And so I would just caution people about taking the pain and the frustration of the previous 8 or 9 years out on what you're seeing right now, when it's clearly the beginning of a process as opposed to being the process.
I agree. The positive way that I look at it is, when you look at football, nobody right now is saying, I don't know about Cignetti and the guys he's bringing in. Everyone's like, you trust the process. There's nobody who's like, I don't know if Cignetti knows. Did he get the right guys in the portal? Is Mendoza really the quarterback he wants? Nobody's saying that. Cignetti has proved he has a system that works, that we trust in the process. Does that mean we're going to the college football playoff? In your fever dream now, yes, we're doing that, but on our great weekend of IU, triumphs. But, does that mean we're going to be winning the title? Don't know. But I think we'll be on the right path doing that. The positive thing that I look at is going back to DeVries did all of this last year in West Virginia. And the question is, how will he do? He did the same thing. He built a roster from literal 0 to 100, a full roster. West Virginia was able to field the team. Like they had enough players. They played in Atlantis. Like they were fine. DeVries has already done this once. The question always is, how is he going to do when you give him more resources? And to me, it's like the question has kind of already been answered. It's like, well, he takes the IU Jet and goes meets Wilkerson again and probably ups the NIL offer, and he signs the player against Kentucky. And like, I'm sure DeVries is like, wow, I didn't have those things at West Virginia. Like when I asked for the Jet, they were like, huh? No, we ain't got no more money in mortgage. Not like he's showing to me that he's doing more with the resources IU has. And again, kind of trusting in the process. Like the guy just did it in West Virginia. He knows how to do it. He's showing me, not that he'll show me anything. He's showing that he can use the higher resources at a higher school to do what he just did, just do it at a better level.
And I guess I would just put a slightly different spin on it and say it's less about the resources and it's more about the culture of college basketball as it has to be addressed by the head coach at a major program. And I think that, and again, not just a Mike Woodson thing, also an Archie Miller thing, also a Tom Crean thing on and off there, more on than off at the end. There are things you have to do in recruiting, in player development, in player relationships. And I think Darren DeVries looks like he's off to a really good start with that. Better than perhaps what we saw out of his predecessors, but it's early, so we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, but I'm excited. It's a good start.
I'm glad. Scott's excited, folks. That's a key element.
And dog
Waffles is excited as well. So
he's very excited.
Anyway, all right. Well, that'll wrap it up for us. We'll be back with more. If you are not planning on going to the spring game, go to the spring game. If you've not driven from Indianapolis to Bloomington since the interstate opened, it's really fast. Like my sister lives in Zionsville. I live on the southeast side of Bloomington. It is an hour from my door to her door. So this is like driving downtown. For a lot of people in terms of the traffic. So take advantage.
I've been saying that for a year now. Like it's been great. It's been open the whole football season. It's fantastic. I was in Bloomington today. It was an hour.
Caulfield 2024. It's like driving downtown. So anyway, just yes, please come join us for the spring game, and we'll keep an eye out for you and try to say hi. Anyway, for Scott, I'm Galen. This is Crimson Cast. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to check out the entire roster of shows on the Back Home Network. And we'll be back maybe this weekend with some spring game thoughts, maybe some more recruit signing. Keep your eyes and ears open for the emergency pods as they emerge. We'll catch you folks, as I said, on the flip side. Stay never daunted. Bring back the Bison. So long, everybody.